Okay, welcome everybody. So we were working with the UN Foundation on climate-proofing food systems in the Global South and assessing investments in research and innovation for resilient smallholder agriculture. To give a quick outline, we'll talk about our background to the topic, a bit of how we approach the methodology. We kind of each dove into individual results, and then we'll give you a summary of our findings and give you a chance for questions. So to give you a bit of background to the client, it was Christine, who was at the UN Foundation, but also had a consulting background and worked with CGIAR and AIM for Climate. Their sort of agriculture sector of the UN Foundation was kind of newly up and running. So their kind of premise to us was that there was a lot of rapidly growing interest in this topic and a lot of published agricultural research, but it was very hard to tell which of these publications were relevant and how the quality of these were. They also had an interest in how private sector investment could be leveraged. Lots of investors wanted to get involved, but wouldn't know where to start. So the intended audience was different partners of the UN Foundation, as well as different global forums and investor forums that might be coming up. So on the right, you can see the different pillars, but I'm just going to dive into some of the kind of broad questions that she asked us. How does the literature talk about innovation and resilience for smallholder agriculture? And are there any trends that we can identify in public-private finance? Are there kind of hot topics that are coming up and shaping how financing is made? And how does the kind of top-down research on financing meet the smallholder experience? So our methodology really focuses on those four pillars. We started by compiling a huge database of literature that was provided to us by the UNF, and then sort of expanding this and carrying out a wider white and grey literature search. We characterised a lot of this based on how relevant it was to us and obviously smallholder farmers, and extracted what we thought was useful. We then attempted to take the different types of financing and categorise them based on the kind of aim and type of financing that they were. From this point onwards, we kind of split up a little bit. We each found these different questions that we were really fascinated by, and we went and did a kind of a deep dive on each of those, hoping they would give us this overall narrative. So I looked at value chain mapping and private sector analysis. Alon looked at the nature-based solutions and how they contribute, and Morgan carried out some case studies on smallholder access. And just at the top, it was really important for the client for us to be iterative, traceable. She wants to come back and be able to see these findings, and it was that balance of comprehensive versus a manageable project in 12 weeks.
Right, so next, compiling and analyzing existing funding sources. So the source of our analysis is based on over 100 loans and grants from 6 funding agencies for a total financing amount of over $2 billion globally. So one of the findings is that credit is the most common financing mechanism that appears in sub-Saharan Africa. 40% of projects contained a strong research component, and Central Asia prioritizes mitigation, whereas South Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, sub-Saharan Africa projects mention both mitigation and adaptation. And on the right, those are the funding agency sources in our analysis, and below that is just a visual representation of the breakdown per area. And this is just another figure that was created to another way of visualizing where the funding is going, and broken down by $1 million. And you can see that most of the funding is going to sub-Saharan Africa.
So one of the exercises we did was looking at this smallholder value chain. This was really a sense of getting a picture of where the smallholder is in the surrounding actors. I think it became very complicated, and a lot of organizations use it as a really specific value chain mapping tool. But what I found really useful here was that you could kind of see the complexity of the system, where the different intermediaries were really important in delivering both the services, the inputs, and the finance to the smallholder. A lot of our case studies, the cash itself would never go to the smallholder. It's moving through one of these intermediaries. So a couple of things we brought up was the strength of interactions were really important on the appropriateness and the diffusion of the intervention, as well as the use of brokers and kind of back and forth movement, as well as, So another thing we did over this was to look at how this interacts with different types of innovation. There's supposed to be one more box up there called service innovation, and I highlighted service innovation and organizational innovation because these appeared to be the most common types. It was sort of Christine's hypothesis that innovation might be focused towards product innovation, new seed types and things like that. But actually what we found was, particularly in the public sector research, organizational innovation around building agricultural co-ops and service innovation around improving the climate information services were really common themes. And coming up again and again.
Okay.
Yes, thanks. So another thing we looked at was the private sector and how this interacts with smallholder resilience. This was really a question of two stories. On the one side, the public institutions like CJIR and FAO address smallholder resilience from the smallholder up, but you also have this growing interest from the private and commercial sector, organizations like MSCI, Carbon Disclosure Project, those really top Fortune 500 companies that Times CO2 is talking about, and how those have such a huge impact on the smallholder farmer, even though they're not directly integrating with them. So for me, the story was kind of about linking these two things. I think Carbon Disclosure Project is one of those organizations that helps improve the transparency and accountability of the supply chains and has an indirect effect on smallholders, but it was really quite far disconnected from the CJIR and type of work like that. So you can see on the left, 200 trillion in assets is what's under the commercial sector, but less than 1 billion in private finance is relevant for smallholder farmers. So my main recommendations were, again, looking at how they could finance micro, small and medium enterprises, but also take the work the public sector is doing and provide those opportunities for the private sector. Another piece of research, lots of bits and pieces to this, was on nature-based solutions. So this is actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing well-being and biodiversity benefits. So this is another interesting topic, sort of thinking about how this is a hot topic that's growing in interest, particularly among commercial investment, and whether this has an influence on how the finance flows in this sense. So Alon started by analysing the history of this term, found really lots of related terms such as agroecology, climate smart agriculture, REDD+, and nature-based solutions, and found there was a lot of overlap with these concepts, and in essence, it was very, very difficult to decide whether new finance to nature-based solutions was new or simply recharacterizing existing funds. So there's 151 billion funded. Most of this was coming from public domestic finance, 20% from private financial flows, and just 1% from public official development assistance. Some of the challenges, it's very difficult to scale. You need the money up front, which can be a challenge for financing these with commercial investors. And Alon also noted that there was a big issue around just transition and how these different mechanisms interact with traditional and Indigenous knowledge.
Great, thank you. So to answer the research question of how does finance meet the smallholder, and what does that ecosystem look like, as well as is there a gender lens incorporated into that, and also an Indigenous knowledge or local knowledge lens? We use case studies to kind of help us gain insight into this. So all the case studies are from Sub-Saharan Africa. These are the case studies that we created. Yes, okay. So among the different case studies, the results and themes, both case studies 1 and 2, which is Ethiopia and Zambia, both have funding or financing that is coming from the Green Climate Fund. Moreover, all the projects together are happening at the same time. The first 2 are 7-year projects, and the latter third one is a 3-year project. It is a total, all of them together, of just under US $1 billion. Important to note also is that, so the first, I'm going to go back, sorry. The first one is using international and domestic financing, whereas Ethiopia is blended finance. So it's EFAD financing. It is a bunch of, it's government, it's EU. So it's a bunch of different financing organizations. And then Kenya is one grant from the World Bank. So all of the projects, all of the case studies rely heavily on climate information services. That's like a large component of all 3 of them. As well as smallholder and community participation in the planning process is best suited to produce sustainable solutions. However, of the materials reviewed for these case studies, smallholders did not appear to be involved in the project conception or design, which is important to note. All include gender metrics. However, the number of metrics and the outcomes were available vary depending on what is being measured. Funding targeted to address gender results in real and physical improvements to livelihoods, and all of the projects note their contribution at achieving nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. A summary of all of our findings. So determining whether a project is bottom up is very nuanced and is specific to each case. Significant financing flows are going to sub-Saharan Africa. Capacity building is common across all financing types. Smallholder access to finance of the cases reviewed occurs mainly through supporting an enabling environment. So either through irrigation schemes or water management and a lot of climate information services, through things like improving forecasts, et cetera. And scaling up remains a priority across all sectors. And there are many ways throughout all the materials, literature reviewed, that innovation is defined. Next, what did we learn? So within nature-based solutions, using education to help inform investors should be a key solution. Carrying out a high level of analysis requires many trade-offs. Innovation can mean a wide range of things, again, and connecting public and private sectors could open up many opportunities for smallholders. Additionally, finance isn't always making its way directly to the smallholder farmer, and co-production with smallholders in project conception and design is essential for adaptation and adoption of the project, and as well as the sustainability of the project. Next steps. So one of the next steps for Alon identified is a quantitative keyword search for nature-based solutions versus other terms across projects. Ensuring engagement of both public and private stakeholders during the formation, and as well as carrying out cross-sectoral analysis of financing from private-public views. And then lastly, I think tracing funding from case to finance flows given more time, and graphing different data points for further analysis would provide additional insight. But the constraints we faced were time. I don't think we could have used more time. And narrowing the scope of the question took a considerable amount of time, I would say. It was a large part of the project. And yeah, having to pick trade-offs of what we were going to focus our time on was another constraint. Thank you so much. Sorry, you were essential to our project, being able to make it this far, and always provided really useful and helpful feedback. So thank you. Also, thank you to Christine, our focal point at the UN, and Ryan and Evelyn as well. I'm just going to go back to this page and allow any question.